Okay. So I had to pause the video to get my brain back in order because I'd forgotten what I was going to say before. And had a quick listen back to what I was saying to remember the point that I was going to make. So when they were interviewing this guy on the street and he was saying how he was afraid of what was going on, and, you know, it reminded me of a quote that I don't know where it's from, but effectively, and you've probably heard some variation of this, where they say violence is the last resort of the incompetent. Now, I don't know where that comes from. It's been attributed to different people, and I tried finding it one time, but I wasn't sort of sure about the veracity of different people's claims about where it actually originates. But the thing that I wanted to say about it is that I personally feel that what was intended by that statement, or perhaps it was just purely accidental, that even the author of the statement didn't actually realize, you know, this particular insight that I gained from it. But you can treat the statement, at least, as a double entendre. So, two meanings from the French phrase. But so, double entendre, violence is the last resort of the incompetent. So why would it have two meanings? Because either what they're saying, and you could be saying both, it is simultaneously true that if you resort to violence, then it shows that you're incompetent, that because the implication is that it wasn't really your last resort, you just thought it was your last resort because you quickly skipped over and were incompetent and everything else, and you had to resort to violence, or you were inclined to resort to violence, so that is what makes you incompetent, because you couldn't find a diplomatic solution. However, the second meaning is being the last resort of the incompetent, meaning that you may have waited too long. This is the other thing. So if you are in a situation where you are dealing with people who are not rational, not reasonable, not operating in good faith, and who do not care if they lie to you, they do not care what the consequences of their actions are, right? All they want is more money, more power, more control, right? They don't care how many people they kill, they don't care how many people suffer, they just want more, 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 more. And if you treat them like they are somebody that you can negotiate with, right, and thus you wait too long before you resort to violence, maybe it's too late. They could be getting their momentum up, right? Now, fortunately for Russia, I suspect that they kind of knew what was going on for a long, long time, decades in fact, because they saw that history. Now, maybe not everybody within their society understood it, but certain people would have. And with their love of academia and sciences and arts and so forth, they have like a very serious intelligentsia in Russia. So they had a class of people who would have maintained this remembrance of things and the pain that families suffered from what happened with World War II. You know, this gives an incentive to remember what happened, to take things seriously. So you have that aspect of Russia where I think that they saw what was coming. They did have to plan for it. They did have to make stockpiles. They did have to talk to their neighbors. They did have to negotiate. They did have to create, you know, coordinated plans of like, okay, well, in order to get the world on side with us, we have to show that we are blameless, right? So they had to, you know, sit down and talk, as Doctor Who said in my other video. You know, they had to show a willingness to negotiate. So Minsk 1, Minsk 2, they're betrayed in both cases by the Ukrainians, by the West, who guaranteed that agreement. You know, and who admitted later that there was never any intention of sticking to the agreement. It was just to buy time to keep building up weapons, right? But knowing that they were probably going to get betrayed, and I suspect they did. Now, I know that when Putin gave his speech the other day, he was talking about how it's like, you know, yeah, we signed the agreements and they betrayed them, and we're very disappointed about that, which kind of makes it sound like, you know, he wasn't expecting it, but I suspect that he was. I suspect he knew very well. I mean, he hoped that they would see reason. He hoped that they would behave sanely, but he kind of knew that they weren't going to. And so in the background, all this preparation is going on. And that also explains, to me at least, why they may have gone in there at first with a very small force, because having betrayed the agreements, what they wanted to do, you take a little force alongside Kiev. It's not a siege force, guys. It was never a siege. There was no siege of Kiev. So they just take it and say, hi, we're here. Are you really sure you want to do this? Because we're getting ready to kick your asses. You know us, right? You remember us, yeah? Like, we kick ass. And, they gave that one last chance, but they appeared with less force than they could have. If they really, really wanted to, they could have come in with a much, much greater force. They wouldn't have wanted to do a siege, though, because that's a very expensive exercise in terms of manpower. What they wanted to do was to come in with just a small force. Say, remember us? You sure you want to do this? Okay. And then they went back. And then they prepared the gauntlet, the cauldrons. Come on, then. Come on. You think we're weak. Come on. And that's exactly what NATO did. Just kept on pouring it in. The Russians and just developed systems and kept testing systems and tweaking things, and so like they took their time because they knew it's like, okay, fine, we may make some sacrifices here, but we can minimize them, and it's going to keep giving them the impression that they can beat us. So they're going to keep pouring stuff in because clearly we can't trust them. Clearly they're not acting rationally. Sadly for the Palestinians, they had no such opportunity. It was really just a matter of being a far, far smaller country in a very vulnerable position, with neighbours who weren't supporting them, with neighbours who, had been corrupted already, who had been manipulated already, the whole region broken apart from a prior empire, the Ottoman Empire. So there were probably still remnant transitional effects of the breakdown of the Ottoman Empire as well. I mean, these things take time to sort of wear out through generations before things stabilise again. But they're never going to stabilise if you got the Brits and the Americans in there destabilising it, which was, of course, their intention, because what do they want to do? It's like, well, you guys have lots of oil, so the last thing we want you to do is like all the Arabs getting together and being a united force with an intelligent leadership. We want to find the worst amongst you, the most foolish amongst you. I'm talking to you, the Saudis, who are dumb enough to ally with us when you should know from just watching history that we are going to betray you. At some point, we will fucking betray you. And you're idiots for siding with us. But hey, be idiots. That serves our interests very well. And the Saudis did exactly what they wanted. And so did others, where they really did not see Palestine as, this is a breachhead. If we let this happen, we are fucked. Eventually, we're fucked. Right? They might pretend that they're not going to get us at first, but they'll get us. Right? We have to stop this. An ocean front is a great place to stop something. Why? Because they have to arrive in boats. Right? They're very, very vulnerable. They're in a boat. Right? We're on land. We can put up fortresses and bunkers and all sorts of different stuff. Set traps and shit. But what did they do? They allowed the West to do that. They should have been militantly behind Palestine from day one. But I guess they were probably cowed from previous history, because of course the Brits did used to have a much more powerful navy that didn't break down just trying to start the engine. And as Andrei Martynov says, they're nobody now. But anyway, so sadly for the Palestinians, they are in that position, and this is where I got into in this article, just talking about BlackRock and Vanguard, of course, because as we know with Ukraine, that BlackRock and Vanguard had big plans to, probably strip mine the area, farm the shit out of it, bring all their, chemical intensive farming in that poisons people. They don't care. It's like it's a way to make money out of the chemicals industry and to experiment with chemicals, which they want for military reasons, which is why the companies that produce the chemicals are members of that non-for-profit I was talking about, which is the tendering hub for the military. So how does the military get their chemical weapons? Well, they get all these companies who produce chemicals involved through being members of a tendering hub, non-for-profit. We want to keep the USA as the leading force in all these forms of killing people. So, I would say what we're going to see is that BlackRock and Vanguard have bet everything on this, but of course they've also been bailed out of a lot of their risk, because what did Australia do? Right? If we go back to John Howard as Prime Minister, where Peter Costello, as the Treasurer at the time, gambled and lost billions of dollars on the stock market in the futures trading, right? They did other things which just spent enormous amounts of money, and Australia's debt suddenly jumped up by billions of dollars, higher than it had ever been at that time. Now, following that, when we had Rudd and Gillard, we then got into the GFC, so this engineered financial crisis around the world, where, again, the truly guilty parties are getting bailed out. You know, they kind of offer up a couple of sacrificial goats to, you know, make it look like, you know, they've brought the perpetrators to justice, but most of them didn't get touched, didn't get mentioned. And a whole bunch of people are robbed. Massive transfer of wealth upwards from people who lost everything. And so the ALP in power through that time in Australia had to spend a lot of money, but they did the sensible thing by giving a lot of money to the poor. Because what happens with that money? Well, it circulates the maximum number of times before eventually, you know, bubbling up. So when you hear about trickle-down economics, right, from Reagan, I mean, that is just a euphemism for pissing on your head and telling you it's raining. But the truth of the matter is that it's all a bubble-up economy. Why? Because, like, the banks are going to take out their fees, the governments are going to take out tax, and eventually, whether through them or the corporations that own everything, all the money eventually goes upwards, right? So you get the maximum circulation per dollar by putting it down the bottom, as far down the bottom as you can. And at least, I mean, I'm not a fan of the ALP, especially not these days, but at least they understood that principle, and so that's what they did. And as a consequence, we sailed through the GFC relatively easily. You know, like most Australians didn't hurt too much through it. But then that kind of raised our debt as a country to, what was it, around like 30 billion around that time, maybe 50 billion at the top end. And then Abbott's mob came to power. And what was the very first thing they did? Like within a week or so, they'd already accused the previous government of fudging the numbers, and they said, well, actually, we just inherited a debt of 90 billion. Now, the difference between what they claimed the debt was and what it actually was when the previous government left just happened to exactly match what they quickly spent the moment they got into Parliament on the F-35 program, you know, buying these jets that we didn't need and the Australian Air Force didn't want, and other monies that they pretty much just gave away to foreign interests and to wealthy local people, right? So there was this robbery of the Australian economy, which was in the tens of billions of dollars, and that was blamed on a discrepancy, you know, that was apparently the ALP lying about, like, how much debt they had, but in reality, if you just look at the numbers, it exactly matched what the Abbott government spent the moment they got in there in the first week or two. It's like they just quickly spent a bunch of money and then claimed that the debt was higher, and nobody took them to task on it. Now, following that, so we're now up to about 90 billion, I think. And mind you, I'm going from memory here, so if I get the numbers slightly wrong, it doesn't matter. I mean, so long as we're in the ballpark, that's what matters. Now, you then get going from Abbott into Turnbull, and I think it was around, like, through that transition that we went up to, like, roughly, 150 billion, 170 billion, maybe, something like that. And again, like, a lot of this money was just stuff going upwards and out of the country. Like, they're just literally funding other people's interests, right? They're not, like, they're cutting everything locally and they're just giving away tens and tens of billions of dollars. So they're asset stripping Australia for the benefit of our overlords overseas, largely, and like the local overlords. And then you go from Turnbull into Morrison. And now what you get is the debt quickly going up to, like, you know, 350 billion. Now remember, prior to Howard, about the highest our national debt had ever been was about 3 billion, right? So it's now, in fact, from before this, I think when it got to about that 150, 170 billion mark, I think it was at that stage, it was already higher than the cumulative debt of every single government of Australia going back to Federation. Right? So that's how much debt they had incurred, was the, like, you imagine putting together every single debt ever incurred by every Australian government since Australian Federation and putting it into one debt. That's what they did. That was an enormous level of debt to pile on the country. And all for what? Did we get anything out of it? No, not a goddamn thing. Then it goes up to 300, 350 billion. Then before you know it, it's like 700 billion by the, I think it was around that kind of 700 billion mark by the time Morrison was booted out. And mind you as well, remember, like, this is a guy who was one of the dodgiest characters ever. And in addition to this criminal thing of like all these successive governments just stripping us of resources, right? Impoverishing Australians. For what? For wars and other crap, you know, that none of us want to be involved in. And then now, of course, you've got this idiot Albanese in there who is the most gutless fuck in the entire world, because what can he do for Julian Assange? It's like, oh, well, this has gone on for too long, but are we going to tell the Americans to, like, let him the fuck out, or there's going to be trouble? No, we wouldn't say that. You know, no, yeah, fuck it, just torture the guy, kill him, whatever, you know, but you shouldn't. You know, what? That's it. That's all you can do. That does not show me that you genuinely give a shit about Julian Assange. You don't. Now, is there any doubt that he's a hero? No. He exposed war crimes. He exposed crimes against humanity. He exposed criminality in government. He exposed criminality. That's journalism. That's hero-level, legendary stuff. I don't give a fuck who you claim he puts at risk in doing that. Because the fact is, if they're up to war crimes, if they're up to crimes against humanity, then maybe something bad should happen to them, and fuck them while we're at it. I don't give a shit about those people. They're the ones carrying out the crimes that their bosses tell them to carry out. Who fucking cares about them? The world would be better without them. I want more people like Julian Assange. I want a whole population full of people like him in their various respective fields. I want an artist like Julian Assange. I want a musician like Julian Assange. I want, you know, journalists like Julian Assange. I want politicians like Julian Assange. People with decency, character, courage, commitment. That's what I want. I don't want the fucking mindless baboon fuckwits that we've got. What's the point of that? Anyway, enough of my rant. So the next thing I got into in this article, because, like, yeah. So I mean, like, so anyway, just quickly on BlackRock and Vanguard, I think that, yeah, look, they have probably asset stripped a lot of so-called allies of the West to cover their risk, you know, because they have trillions to invest and they want to see a return. Now, I don't think that there is enough money out there that they can get their hands on to complete their project, because no matter how much money you've got, it cannot magically create industrial facilities. It cannot magically create, pull raw materials, process them to high quality. It cannot magically suddenly create this intelligent workforce, the education system required to produce that workforce and to keep the next generation. And what have we had for decades since the 1970s is the undermining of all this stuff across the Western world. So it's like they have a small clique of people that they're happily kind of training up, but what they don't realize is this. You see, you can't know who is going to be the brilliant people. And just because you give the resources to a bunch of people doesn't mean they're going to become brilliant. They could be completely useless still, even if you throw all the money in the world at them. And what you've done is you've said, these people who are loyal to us, they're the ones that we will fund to become the technicians, to become the scientists, to become the engineers and so forth. And they will produce all this brilliant stuff. How do you know that? No, you don't. And the proof is in the pudding. No, they're not. I've seen what's happening with, you know, Western technology is going downhill, because the decisions being made at every single level lack a lot of what's up here in all the people that you didn't fund. So fortunately, the kinds of idiots who run things like BlackRock and Vanguard, who influence the governments and so forth, and who influence all these stupid things going on in the world, like, they make bad decisions because they're idiots. They have lots of money and power not out of intelligence, they have it out of brutality. That is how they get it. They have it out of the privilege of inheritance. That is how they got it. the vast majority of things that they exploit in order to get their wealth are not things that actually ever required any of them to be remotely brilliant, you know. And besides which, I mean, anything produced which they funded, which has any level of brilliance to it, was likely produced by somebody else who became subservient to them in order to get the funding because they were desperate for it. And ultimately, it didn't result in what it could have been. And I think what I'm actually going to do with this video is actually record a shorter video as well, because this one's turning out to be quite long. But it kind of feels like I should say all this stuff anyway. So, does Israel have a right to exist? No, absolutely not. It is utterly unnecessary. It was imposed upon the Arabic people of the region. They didn't want it. They didn't ask for it. They didn't need it. And prior to the imposition of Israelis upon Palestine, and then all the subsequent genocides and stuff of the Nakba and whatever, prior to that, there were Christians, Muslims, and Jews living in peace in the secular nation of Palestine. And it's only become so violent because of all of this interference. Now, the British, of course, were involved from the early days, prior to all this stuff as well, like, you know, setting up the situation whereby then the Balfour Declaration comes about and so on and so forth, and the creation of this state of Israel, which is not a valid state by any valid interpretation of law. And, you know, they imposed it on the region for what purpose? What, to give a homeland for the Jews? Why did they need a homeland? I mean, it's a religious belief. You know, can't they just practice it in any country where you're free to practice your religious beliefs? Why do they need an entire country? Why do you need to oust the other religious people, local, native to that country, to give it all to a different people who go around murdering the other people? Like, that's the one you're choosing? The murder spree people? Really? Doesn't make any sense to me. Anyway, and on the subject of law and whether it has a right under law, well, I mean, look, these things aren't really in dispute. It's like it's an unlawful occupation force. It's based upon lies and genocide and land theft. They don't have a right under international law to defend themselves. They have a military, and this is the thing that I have a massive objection with as well, is like with compulsory military service, it basically means that every single so-called civilian is just an off-duty military officer. You know, so it's like you can't go into somebody's house and murder them and then come out and go, Barley, I'm off duty now. I'm a civilian now. You can't hurt me now. You know, 2 minutes ago, you were murdering people, right? You don't get to do that. You're in their land as an unlawful occupation force. You have no right to self-defense. You don't have I mean, I know that you're going to do it, but this is a separate issue, right? You're going to do it anyway because you're an asshole and a hypocrite, but you don't have the right under law to do it. The Palestinians have the right under law because it's defense of themselves, and it's, you know, it's a fight against occupation, unlawful occupation by a foreign force who is bullshitting about history and changing facts to make it look like that they have some kind of original claim. And I do get into this argument in this article. But anyway, so the law of hypocrisy is something that I came up with, which I'll probably cover in a video and an article just about the law. But essentially, and I think like there's probably like a hell of a lot of judges and lawyers who don't understand this, but you see, the law is a system. The law is not a set of legislation. That's not what it is. Legislation, in fact, technically speaking, isn't law. Legislation operates under the law, but it is social and corporate contract. It's an agreement that operates under the law. And as such, it has to abide by contract law for a start, because it is a contract. So contract law has precedence in law, and it must obey those rules. And because it's a social contract between the government and government employees and government suppliers of things and so on and so forth, the purpose of the The constitutional law is to limit the powers of government. Remember, they are supposed to be public servants. They are not managing you, the resource. They are not people who have power over you, the people. They are your servants, or at least they're supposed to be. And therefore, any people claiming to be a government who treat you as a resource, as something owned, as a slave, as an employee, as a ward of the state, however they're treating you to try and gain some kind of, rights or domination over you, that is invalid under law. Okay? The only way they can be a government is as public servants in a social contract where you are paying them to do their job of serving you. There's the contract. The Constitution limits their powers to exercise the will of the people for the purpose of stopping them from becoming such a power over the people. The contract law is around the contract itself. The constitutional law is around limiting the powers of government with respect to the contract. And then you have statute law influencing how legislation can be written, how it should be interpreted and so forth. But statute law is about legislation. It doesn't turn legislation into law. It is an area of law pertaining to legislation. And this is where I think a lot of people misinterpret things. So they think of legislation as law when it's not. And so the reason I brought this up was this law of hypocrisy thing, where if you want to look at natural law, okay, so foundational beneath all of that, and several other things as well, if you want to look at the difference between civil and criminal and so forth, you have natural law. Now, many people, again, here are misinterpreting what natural law is. They think of it as like the laws of God because they are religious, but the law is a system. The law is based upon legal arguments and reasoning and logic, right? As any other system must do. It doesn't matter whether we are talking about the monetary system, about mathematical systems, about a mechanical system, an electrical system, a computer system, a software system, all systems of all types. And this would be more meaningful if you knew the scientific definition of a system, but I'll treat that in a separate video on a separate topic. But all systems must obey the following principles. Firstly, they must obey the laws governing the domain in which they reside. Secondly, they must be congruent with themselves, right? So if you have a self-contradictory system, then it will have dysfunction. If you have a system which is contradictory to the laws governing the domain in which it resides, it will be dysfunctional. So to have a system that is fully functional and without dysfunction, it must obey these principles. The legal system is a system. The system of law is a system. But it's a system that has been corrupted by, intentionally as well, by the misuse of language and the deceptive use of language. And there's a whole history around that, which again, like I could go into another video, but I won't just for now. But I just wanted to bring this up about natural law because, see, natural law to me is this. Natural law is the laws of logic and the laws of physics, because without the laws of logic, you cannot have a logical, legal argument. You cannot determine which argument is true, which argument is false. You need logic. In order to have physical, forensic, material evidence, you need science, physics, right? So physics, a natural law, gives you the capacity to determine physical forensic evidence and prove it alongside laws out of logic, which of course includes mathematics. So these are natural laws: logic, mathematics, physics. We can now have evidence, arguments to come to correct conclusions when applied to a case. So that is natural law. Contract law, civil law, criminal law, everything else is subservient to that. It has to be, otherwise the whole system breaks down. It cannot be without dysfunction, right? Systems, all systems must abide by these rules to be without dysfunction. So if you want to achieve justice, you need the system to be without dysfunction. Now, what the corruption does is it brings in dysfunction, of course, the misinterpretation of law, the misuse of language. So the very fact that this whole thing was vulnerable to corruption, and the very fact that there was an incentive to corrupt it, is what did corrupt it and the reason why it is now dysfunctional. And the reason why, I'm quite sure that there are lawyers and judges who do not understand the things that I just said. They won't have a fucking clue, because their interpretation of law, their understanding of law, comes from books that were all kind of biased by people before them who didn't ever give this any thought, who didn't even necessarily understand these other areas which are relevant whether they like it or not. Right? You don't get to choose this, okay? It's part of the way the universe itself works. Anyways, so the law of hypocrisy comes into this thing of natural law. And it's a law that comes out of the rules of language. And it basically says this. So this is a meism that I came up with, but, sort of quote me and just, point people towards my videos so that they can figure out, sort of, hey, I need to support this guy. If the roles were reversed and someone did to you what moments ago you did to them, and you would not only argue against the very position you just took when somebody else takes it, but you would also argue against the very logic, the exact same logic you used to justify it when you were doing it, but now they're using it to justify it against you. This defines your case, your argument, as invalid when you are, justifying it, right? This is what makes it hypocritical. This is the law of hypocrisy, right? Now, in the case of Israel and Palestine, right? So you invade somebody else's country, you murder them, you steal their land, right? Please tell me that you would feel like, yeah, that's fine if you do it to us. No, you wouldn't. The only way you can make that claim is if you're a masochist or a liar, right? So your case is hypocritical, because if somebody else did do it, and the proof is there in the pudding as well anyway, because even though you're bullshitting about exactly how these events played out of the whole situation at the moment, right? So there's a whole bunch of bullshit in there, but even if it was true, what are you doing? You are arguing against people doing back to you, and at least they were local. Shit, they at least had a right to do it. They have a right under law to defend themselves from your occupation, but you are still ignoring all that because you're a hypocrite. Therefore, your case is invalid. You have no basis in law. Your argument doesn't work. And there is no counter-argument. No matter what anybody says after that point, it's all fucking irrelevant. Because this is at the foundation of law. If you have a hypocritical case, if you have a hypocritical argument, then your argument is not congruent with natural law, with logic. Your case is invalid. It doesn't matter what evidence you have. It doesn't matter whether it was invented or whether it was real. Nothing matters. Your case is hypocritical. But the fact that other evidences and arguments actually play against you, that is what makes it even worse, because you never had a valid case to be there in the first place. Anyways, so in logic, we deal with these kinds of constructs, if, then, else, and, or, not, inclusive, exclusive, union, intersection. And you would have seen these things, if you remember from your high school days, doing like Venn diagrams and sets and stuff in early high school. At least I hope you would have. Assuming, of course, you were lucky enough to go to high school and to get a good education. I know that there are many people who, through poverty or whatever else, missed out, or who just didn't have good education in their area. And I was very, very lucky in that regard. Like, as much misfortune as I've suffered in my life, at least I was one of the last generations to get through the education system before it was so horribly corrupted. But the crap they are teaching these days. I mean, I have personally witnessed falsehoods taught at reputable universities in science classes. That shouldn't even be possible, because for something to be labelled as a fact, and a known fact, so it's not just a fact, but we know it is a fact, you have to have proven it is a fact. You need a proof, and a proof is a very, very specific thing. If you don't have a proof, then you may have a fact, but you cannot claim it to be known to be a fact. The proof is what is required to know that it is a fact. Now, people who've studied maths will know what I'm talking about when I talk about proofs, but the same principles for a proof come out of the more fundamental areas of philosophy and logic, and so they can be applied to anything, and hence the reason of the connection through to law. Because what we're trying to do with our language, with our words, with our reasoning in a legal argument is to create the equivalent of a mathematical equation, right? But with words, talking about things, talking about sets and systems of objects which have relationships to each other and which change state over time within a defined domain to lead us to a conclusion, right? And if you use those scientific principles, you would get the best possible legal arguments and the best possible outcomes under law if you had a law that wasn't corrupted. Now, I'm no legal expert. I mean, I don't claim to be, but I'm just saying that I did study some law. I had some great conversations with my law professors. I did continue studying law even after university, even though I actually, see, I was originally enrolled in a Bachelor of Arts just because I wasn't sure what to do. And I wanted to try a bit of everything because universities are not set up for people like me. They are set up for people, particularly these days, who come fresh out of high school, want to get a piece of paper and get a job and a career and have a nice little stable, happy, safe life, right? That isn't why I was there. And my reasons, long story, so I won't go into it, but point is, the place isn't made for me, so I had to kind of like manipulate what I wanted out of the system, and it took time. So I began with like just enrolling in a Bachelor of Arts. I switched to a double in engineering and computer science, and that engineering degree, the engineering side of things, in the first year was a general engineering degree, so a little bit of civil and structural and mining and electromechanical, and so they go in and gave you a taste of everything, so that in your second year and onwards you could then specialise. But what I ended up having to do was change universities because accommodation in that town didn't work out. And I had no job, I had no prospects, I had no savings. So like this was already, like as a mature age student, a desperate attempt for me to try and build up my skills and my knowledge so that I could kind of progress a little bit easier and faster with work to make more money so that I could get some kind of like level of financial freedom, which didn't pan out for me as well, unfortunately. But it was never really about getting the piece of paper. It was about trying to go further with it. And so I had my own vision, I had my own ideas, and I wasn't sure how to get that out of the system, so I kind of went in there exploring. So I switched from arts into the engineering computer science, and switched again into specifically electronic engineering computer science, and ended up doing like a lot of maths, a lot of sciences of various types, a lot of engineering. But prior to that, in the arts thing, I picked up some law, and it was fascinating, and I was actually considering doing a law degree. But I made the interesting decision that I thought a law degree would be too hard with all the research and essays, because I really just didn't like writing essays. And so for some bizarre reason, I thought a double in electronic engineering computer science would be easier. And yes, I know that's a really stupid conclusion to draw. Anyways, so I know like this video is going to go on for ages. I might have to put it in parts perhaps. Yeah, in fact, I think I will do that. I'll do it as like a multi-part thing. Anyways, so law I found fascinating, and I did kind of continue studying it, and I think that there's a lot here that could be said on behalf of the people of Palestine. However, the problem, of course, is that a system like law is only as good as your enforcement of it. Now, they already had laws, they already had international law saying it is unlawful to invade another country. International law is supposed to respect sovereignty of countries and cultures. So the whole Israeli project broke that international law. They then went about committing a genocide. Again, war crimes, crimes against humanity, against the law, unlawful behavior. They lied about it and committed other types of fraud around it. There's so many, laws that have been broken in this whole Israeli project. So there's nothing lawful about it. But at the end of the day, what does any of that matter if you didn't enforce the laws? And that's what happened. They didn't get enforced. And now here's where I find the very interesting thing is that Palestinian people are being asked to abide by the very law that the Israelis ignore, and which you didn't enforce against the Israelis, and you ignore when they're denied, in the Israeli crimes against you. And then if you dare fight back, which you have a right under law to do, they then criticize you. It's like, but we had the right to do that. Your law says so. And now you're congratulating them and feeding them weapons to do the same thing back to us when they don't have the right to do it. So law is going to be meaningless if you don't back it up. And all of the other nations of the world really should have come together and said, it doesn't matter whether this is our fight or not. We can see what these people are doing. Collectively, we have to stop this. And, you know, then it would be a matter of like, they'd have to convince their militaries of like, you know, can we do all this together? Can we work with other nations? You know, who are the nations we can trust? Can we do something that's just going to make this breachhead really, really hard? Like, we can't let them develop it. If they had done that in the start, then the whole Israel project could have been stopped. And it would have prevented a lot of suffering and a lot of death. And what has it been replaced with anyway? Like the peaceful nation of Palestine, which was secular, with Jews, Muslims and Christians, and probably atheists too, living alongside each other in peace and harmony, quite happily, right? They were doing fine. I mean, it wasn't necessarily the wealthiest place in the world, but they were doing fine, you know, because, hey, we can live our lives. That's something. That was all taken away from the era. And what was it replaced with? Apartheid, bigotry, fascism, cowardice, brutality. This is a despotic regime that just murders people, tortures them, kidnaps children. Murders children, murders babies, murders mothers and pregnant mothers, murders a surgeon while trying to save the life of somebody. If you are in any way on side with this, you're a cunt, right? That's all there is to it. In fact, that would be an insult to cunts. And herein, I will mention, I came up with a bit of an insult because it's like, I don't like insulting dogs or pigs or cockroaches or any other creature that has any right to exist. And when we hear people talking about bad people, you say, oh, like, oh, cockroach and, you know, pig and, you know, whatever. And it's like, yeah, but pigs are actually really nice. Cockroaches serve a useful purpose. They're just all minding their own business. We might not always like them, but it's like, you know, it's like they're innocent creatures, you know. So I thought it was a bit unfair on them to liken them to bigots and fascists and murderers. And I came up with a better quote, which is this, or a better insult, which is this. You say, you're an insult to a thing that would be an insult to shit if shit were referred to as that thing, right? I think that kind of settles the matter. And yeah, that is pretty much what I think of anybody who can somehow justify invading a nation, murdering everybody, stealing their land and so forth, and not even admitting it. And I've said myself of this country, Australia, that it was based upon the same things, right? They came here with the lie of terra nullius. It was unlawful under international law. They invaded. They committed a genocide. They stole the land. They lied about it. You know, they covered up evidence. You know, the crimes against the Indigenous people here are astounding. And I said some time ago that, look, I know this can't happen. Like, we haven't got any kind of magical thing. But if by some kind of magic, me having never existed, would somehow magically bring back all of those people who were murdered by the invading Brits and give them their country back and they could live in peace, then I'd happily let go of my life for that. Because they were innocent. And what's so bloody special about my life that, you know, I'm not worthy of a genocide. Nobody is. Nobody will ever be worthy of a genocide, and I'll be fucked if I'll ever be grateful for somebody committing a genocide on my behalf. You did not do that. You did it because you wanted to, and now you tell me I'm supposed to be grateful, and then you lie about what it is. Like, you know, the stories that we are told are like, oh, you got to be grateful about the soldiers that went to war and fought for your freedom. No, they fucking didn't. That's not what they fought for. They fought for billionaire industrialists. They fought to murder people defending their own country so that rich people could get richer and maybe share a little bit of it with us. But it's like, I didn't want those other people to be murdered. I'd much rather we just developed things locally, and if we needed extra resources, we go over and trade with them fairly. That would probably actually work out a lot better in the end too. You'd spend vastly less resources. War costs tons. And I'm not just talking the resources to conduct the war, but all the stuff that you destroy, all the opportunity lost and skills lost of people and so forth to make a more amazing world for all of us and all the interactions. Like, there is no profit from war. It is bullshit. If you think that anybody ever profited from war, then you do not understand the term net gain. It's net gain, not cherry-picked data. ignoring anything you don't want to take responsibility as an externality so that you can pretend that you've got a gain measured only in a non-scientific unit of measurement. That's not a fucking gain. Don't be ridiculous. Anyway, so yeah, this is kind of going on a long time. I'm amazed that people can do these videos quicker, actually. But anyway, I hope people enjoy hearing me rant on. I'll leave the article, I think, for people to read if they want to, because I kind of like had a structured thought there, and this has been very unstructured. But I'll just perhaps like finish it with, look, you know, there's a lot of things that I could say. I could go on for hours because I don't like seeing other people suffer. I do not like seeing people, innocent people especially, suffer. It's like if you were a horrendous, bigoted, you know, fascistic freak who had caused suffering to many other people, I wouldn't want to gleefully watch you suffering as some kind of like revenge and satisfaction, but knowing that you were and being able to walk away and like, you know, if that person like who was just pure evil was captured and put in a little concrete bunker and kept alive to suffer the longest period of time without any fucking human contact, I'm not going to actually really feel all that sorry for them. And you can tell just how bad I'd be if I ever like needed to get revenge badly and you know, had the resources to do that stuff. It's like, yeah, I'd punish them bad, real bad, but you know, I got better things to do, like make videos. And I mean, I want to make comedy, I want to make music, I want to do all sorts of different stuff, but unfortunately, like a lot of other people, my life has gone down a track dictated by circumstances created by powerful people, and you have a choice in life. You either ignore what your heart and mind tells you and just become another sort of ignorant consumer and play along with the game, and hopefully you do kind of well, and maybe you will because you're not causing a fuss, or you can rock the boat. And I decided to rock the fucking boat. Anyway, hope you enjoyed that, and free Palestine, free Julian Assange, and keep fighting, everybody. Thank you.